You're listening to episode 90, Reclaiming Your Wholeness and Gaining Your Freedom with Skyler Mechelle. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome to this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate having you here, as always. And I hope you didn't miss the show too much last week. I decided not to release an episode last Monday, partly due to it being a holiday and partly due to wanting to catch up on some stuff. And so it seemed like a good opportunity to take a break to do that. And of course, if you're listening to this sometime down the line, then that doesn't even matter. But for those of you who listen each week, I just wanted to mention that. And can you believe that we're at episode 90? We're only 10 away from 100, which just seems a little bit crazy to me. But it's also really exciting. And I just want to thank each and every one of you who have listened, regardless of how many episodes you've listened to. I appreciate your support. And I have a really great guest for you this week. I'm joined by Skyler Mechelle. And I think that she has such an incredible and inspiring story, and I'm really glad to be able to have her share that with you today. But before we get into it, I do just want to take a minute and let you know that today's episode is brought to you by audible.com. Audible is the premier provider of digital audiobooks. I signed up with them to get you a free audiobook download along with a 30-day free trial. They have over 180,000 titles, including some that have been mentioned on this show in the past, that you can choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or whatever you use as an MP3 player. So if this is something that interests you and you want to check it out, all you have to do is go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/audible, and you can go ahead and get your free audio download along with that 30-day free trial. So I'm really glad that Skyler and I got connected, and I think you're going to find her story inspiring and encouraging. Skyler's going to tell us about how she's been able to heal from growing up in a family where everything appeared perfect on the outside, but that was certainly not the case on the inside, and there was lots of abuse going on, and Skyler was sexually abused as she was growing up, as well as trafficked, and also had to deal with mental, physical, and emotional abuse, and was just in a very controlling environment. And that being said, I do want to issue a trigger warning, as listening to that part of Skyler's story could definitely be triggering and upsetting to you. But one of the things I love is how Skyler says that her gifts aren't her experience, but rather they were refined in her experience. And I think that that is such a great way to look at it. And as we're going through Skyler's story, I think that you'll be able to see how that has played out for her. And she's going to tell us about how taking a trip to Ireland began to change things for her, and how when she came back from that trip, she ended up leaving home and eventually ended up going to rehab, and she'll tell us about what that experience was like for her. And she's going to talk about how it was harder for her to heal than it was for her to endure the trauma, which is going to make a lot of sense when you hear her explain that. And she's going to talk about how she's been able to reclaim her wholeness and cultivate a beautiful life. And with freedom also being a big part of it for her, I asked her what freedom means to her, and I really love her answer to that, and I think that you will as well. And Skyler is also going to talk about reclaiming her feelings and how healing is available to everyone and how freedom has no expiration date. And what I think is so cool is that Skyler's only 23 years old, but she has spent the past 5 years of her life really focused on her healing and doing a lot of work to get to where she is today. And I think that she has a lot of wisdom from the work that she's done over these past 5 years. And now she's getting to a point where she's sharing her story and sharing what she's learned and just putting it out there so that others can benefit from it. So I think regardless of your background, if you come from an abusive background and if you're still struggling with that, then this episode will definitely resonate with you. So without any further ado, I want to go ahead and get into it, and I'm going to go bring Skyler on. Skyler, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to share your story with us.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and speak about my truth and just talk to you.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here as well. And so you and I got connected because of Emily Stroya, who was on here just a little while back in episode 86. And you reached out to me after you listened to our episode and told me a little bit about your background. And I'm really glad you did, because once I started to look into your story more, I knew that you would be a great guest for the show. And Skyler, I know that you have your website where you've started to work with others as a mentor and as a teacher, and I'll definitely have you tell us more about that later. But you also have a YouTube channel where you started to post some videos, and since I found out about you, I've watched most of those videos, and what I take away from them is your message that we can heal in spite of whatever we've been through, and that we can be free. And through your videos, which are very vulnerable, you are an example of that. And as I watched them, I couldn't help but feel happy for you that you've been able to find that freedom in spite of everything you've been through and all the pain you've endured. And that's why I'm glad to have you here.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you so much. My heart just broke open and then rose a little bit higher. It's, I carry freedom fully now. And that's something that, I like to say my gifts aren't my experience, but my gifts were refined in my experience. And I think that's
I love that.
true for all of us. It's like we all have intrinsic value and worth that can never be stolen. And a lot of times we come to this place where we just feel like we're too fragmented or broken to share that message. And one of my biggest joys with working as an advocate and a teacher and a mentor is to look at my tribe, as I call them, and see them for who they are, because my gift really is many things, but my biggest gift is to see, because I was once unseen, and to see them in their light, as more than what they've endured, regardless of what they've endured, is one of my greatest joys. And I had to do that for me first in order to be able to really be a vessel of that gift. And it's just such an honor, to stand here, the things that you just said, and to really be an advocate for freedom, because I believe that we're all deserving of freedom, no matter what we've been through or what we've done or who we are or where we want to go. There's no one way or one road or one mentality. It's personal, and survival strips us of that, because we have to shrink our scale of understanding in order to really endure everything that we've endured. And to reclaim that self-autonomy back is to reclaim your voice and then to know how to use it. And yeah, I'm all about that.
Yeah, that's incredible. So what I like to do is, just kind of start at the beginning, start with your story, and then have you share with us what you'd like us to know about that, and then we'll go from there. Does that sound okay?
Perfect.
Take a few minutes or whatever, and let us know what you experienced growing up.
Yeah, so I grew up in a pretty upper middle class family. We had a significant amount of funds, and so I like to say that a lot of things happened behind closed doors, and we projected this perfect reality on the outside because that was what our environment asked of us. And on the inside, I was raised within a family of a man who was an abuser, who chose a very sick woman in order to portray this hero kind of mentality of, his charisma and strength and personability. The way that he was seen outside of their marriage was someone who was fun and loving, and children loved him. And my mother was seen as this sick individual who needed his care. and they struggled a lot before I was born, from the little tiny pieces and glimpses of what I received from my aunts and uncles as I grew up. But when I was born, my dad ended up secretly getting a vasectomy after many years of not being able to have a baby with my mom. And so when I was born, I was kind of born into this zone of a woman who thought a baby would change her whole life and give her the love that she always needed, and wasn't prepared or able to take care of herself first, and a man who was very, very abusive. And by the time I was 3 years old, that's when the molestation with my father started. And it was about 3 to 4 times a week, all the way up until I was 17, 18. And it went anywhere from playtime to actual rape and penetration. And when I was in my teen years, he also trafficked me to his friends. And my mom, on the other hand, was this woman who really was very, very sick. And she was the mental and physical and emotional abuser, someone who was so trapped within her own trauma, and then the trauma of my father, being very controlling and manipulative and using her as a scapegoat for, she is the monster of this house, she is the bad guy of this house, and became kind of like my controller. I like to say that I was kind of raised with Catholicism on crack as a little joke, but I mean, it's not necessarily funny. I think there's just parts of our story where, as we're healing from it, there's so much pain. And for me, as a teacher and advocate, I always like to add in a little bit of freedom to let ourselves experience a variety of emotion as we process, even if that looks kind of obtuse. So sometimes, I'll laugh about things that aren't funny when I share, and that's just, I think, for me, part of healing. So my mom, she was the person who, outside of the home, I would have to wear rubber bands on my wrists, and she would give me this look anytime I misbehaved. And misbehaved could be anywhere from saying something out of line, or being too charismatic, having not holding the door open for someone else. My kind of role in the world was portrayed as the scapegoat as well, kind of projected off of her being the scapegoat for my dad, and having to be perfect and quiet and very well educated and very well known. And I always had to have straight A's and all of these things. And so outside of our home, I would wear this rubber band, and anytime that I would misbehave, I would have to smack my own wrist. And so there was this mentality, every time that we would go to church, of I would have to, go and repent for the things that I had done. And then I would come out, and she would look at me and she would say, "You lied to the priest. You need to go back in and say again, what you have done wrong." And that was kind of just our relationship. I was never enough. I remember days where I try to be, someone that she could love, and I would write her notes, or, make a bath or clean the house, because she did work a lot, and she would come home, and she would say that I made a mess, and she would just have to clean it up, if I make her dinner or something like that, or that I was just wasting the funds that she was working away on to try and serve me because I was selfish, or all types of expletive words. And then she would, edit the little cards that I wrote as a child, and like cross them out and make sure that the spelling was correct, and that heaviness and oppression of never being enough. And she was also, as I grew and the abuse of my father got worse, someone who would constantly berate me and say, like, "Why are you the way that you are? You should be in a psycho ward," and all of these things. And because I did have ongoing PTSD from the trauma and the sexual abuse of my father, and I didn't know what to name it or call it. And, I would respond differently to heightened situations of emotion or noises, particularly like when we were eating, the very rare times you would eat together as a family. And I would be very triggered by the sound of chewing. And I as I was raised, I wasn't someone who would like vocalize that I was upset, but you could definitely tell. And any type of emotion response would trigger my mom's reaction and outbursts. And regardless of what it was, if it was joy or sadness or anger, and she could just feel it and she would get very, very upset. And then my dad would become, the toddler where he would like throw the food on the ground and just be like, I'm not enough either, and like go into his room and slam the door. And then I would be left, to clean up the mess and, to hear my mom say, what's going on? What's going on? And the times that I would say, well, dad's hurting me is when she would molest me as well and say, you have no idea what he does, he is the monster, I'm not the bad guy. And then there were also moments where she would be on my knees, like clean and crying, telling me to get out of the house because it was unsafe. And that was daily. That was my life growing up from, the moment I can remember till I was, 18. And I carried all of this like it was my responsibility to save them, and my mom and her aunts, or not her aunts, my aunts, so my mom's sisters there, she was one of three. They knew also what was going on, and they also had their own type of abuse, and they also married abusive husbands, and they were also well off, and my family used to really, use money as a source of control for me. And so anytime my aunts would question, or joke about the abuse that was going on because they thought it was, funny, or that was their way of coping. And I remember particularly one time we were driving to this concert and we were in this limo, and, they asked me how everything was going at the house. And I was probably like 13. And I was like, oh, it's great, and kind of playing off everything as I'm fine, because that was my normal response to things. And I was so numb all the time, and normalized it, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to survive it. And they were like, oh, don't lie to us. We know that they abuse you. We know what's going on. And I remember, getting teary, and I was like, yeah, they do. And they ended up like cussing me out and telling me like, well, they bought you a car and they give you all this money, so don't talk like crap on our family and all of these things. And that was reality. I mean, like even my aunts, with their coping skills of, eating disorders and or drug addiction, I was to blame for that as well. It was just this cycle of me at the epicenter of being the scapegoat for everyone. And it was really, I mean, I had moments where I didn't know if I was going to make it. And by the time I was 15, I ended up dropping out of high school because I got a autoimmune disorder called reflex sympathetic dystrophy. And that's basically, how my body decided to save me in a way, because what that did was cause me to be in so much pain that I couldn't be touched. And yet, lo and behold, and I was, 15, 16 again, and I was in the hospital, and instead of having like nurses take care of me, my dad was there all the time. And so I was on a bedpan, I couldn't move, and he was the one who was cleaning me and taking care of me and doing all these things. And I remember, I think that was the first time like a social worker came in and talked to me, but I didn't know anything was wrong because I just normalized it, and I was also petrified of them getting in trouble, I wanted to protect them more than I ever wanted to save myself. And that was kind of like the pattern, in and outside of the home. If ever I, adopted a relationship or a friendship, it was, they were more important than I was. And I carried, like I said, my gifts today of being someone who shelters, being someone who loves. And I was that, but I couldn't be that for myself. And so by the time I was 18, I ended up going away to Ireland for a little bit. And for the 3 months that I was gone, I kind of started to recognize like maybe it isn't me. Maybe I'm not the one who causes the chaos. Maybe I am not the one who's doing all of this. And I was given the beautiful opportunity when I came back to leave my family. And it took a long time because it was very hard. But I did end up leaving, and um, it was,
And before we get into like that
yeah,
part,
yeah.
yeah, I just want to thank you, I mean, for sharing all of that with us. And yeah, I mean, you've definitely went through a lot, and it's terrible how you were just, had to be at the center of it all and just got the brunt of it from both of your parents. And now you said that like things appeared perfect outside of the home though. So so this was all going on behind closed doors, but then outside of the house, like no one would have known that this was happening.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was in elementary school and I would have very adverse reaction to when other kids would get in trouble, and be very emotional about it. Like it was my fault, like I had caused them to get in trouble. And so when I was in elementary school, I was put in therapy and within the school. And like little things like that. But a lot of the times my parents could pass it off as my sensitivity because I was a sensitive kid, and I am a sensitive adult. And um, yeah, and I mean, my relationships were very controlled. Most of the people who I did know were within the circle of my family, and my mom ended up working at every school that I had gone to, from elementary to middle school to high school. She worked in the special education department, and so she would transfer to every school and kind of make her way into the people's lives that I was in. And so a lot of my reality was controlled. And there wasn't really a safe space, if I ever had one, to share what was going on. So it was very perfect on the outside, dangerous on the inside. But I don't really recall any even of my friends who I got close to having it quote unquote easy, and that was kind of just the atmosphere that I was raised in, where we all had stuff going on, and so I kind of normalized it under that guise, I suppose.
Mm, gotcha. And so, yeah, so then let's get into what happened when you turned 18 and how you started to get away from this situation.
Yeah, so I came back from Ireland. I took a little trip, a missions trip, and where I, ended up helping some inner city kids and doing things like that because that was my heart. Despite everything that went on, my mom is this wonderful artist and my dad is hilarious. And, I did, and now today get to really reclaim those things and that part of them that they did give me, even though technically I don't really know who they are outside of the abuse. I do know that those are pieces of them that I witness. And so my mom really did like to do nonprofit stuff. I think that was more a way for her to deal with guilt. And so a lot of my life, I was raised doing helping activities, and my giving heart loved that. And so when I had the opportunity to go to Ireland and do, nonprofit work, I jumped at it. And so I was there for 3 months over the summer, and then my mom ended up coming to Ireland and taking me home. And
So did they not want you to go in the first place?
they were okay with it, but they just kind of like the whole school situation where they did want to know what I was saying and who I was talking to. They did choose the organization that I was going with, so they were kind of okay in those terms. But once I was there for too long, it was like, okay, well, it's unsafe now. We need to know what she's saying and who she's talking to. And so, yeah, I mean, and I remember I did so much personal growth in terms of what I could do without, really recognizing where I was living and, taking myself into an unsafe space, which, for me in healing, I recognize so often that we have to feel safe enough to feel the things that we couldn't feel and had to normalize. And so, at that period of time, I healed as much as I could basically while I was in Ireland, or recognized as much as I could while I was in Ireland. And
It must have felt good for you to get away for a little while.
yeah, I mean, it was always uncomfortable just because I'm so used to, if I ever were to like receive healthy love, it was very painful for me because it would kind of remind me of what I didn't have. And so I would kind of veer off to the left of it, or um, choose something that would, kind of take me away from that situation, because being faced with something that I, wasn't experiencing, especially as a child, just brought again those terms of you're not enough, and or you caused the chaos, or someone else deserves, healthy love and not you. And those were definitely manipulative words that were used, over me. And so when I was away, it was very nice. I remember when my mom came and I had bought her flowers and I really wanted to show her, like I wrote in this healing journal and I was like, look, mom, I want to show you all the things that I have done. And it lasted for like an hour. And then she ended up hitting me and getting very upset. And then I was crying, which I usually don't do, just because any type of additional emotion, like I had mentioned with my mom, caused her to get worse. And she ended up leaving the hotel room we were staying in, and she came back with like thousands of dollars worth of clothes. And I remember, because that's kind of how they would control me a lot. And I remember just like crying, and I was so upset because I was like, in my 18-year-old mind, I was like, oh, I healed enough to still have a relationship with my mom, and then when we got in that argument and she hit me and it wasn't okay, I was like, okay, well, it's not what I thought. I'm still not enough, kind of thing. Even so, I would constantly,
Right, you keep putting the blame on yourself.
yeah, yeah, and so yeah, it was more painful than anything. And then when I got home, I ended up meeting this amazing family who lived about 10 minutes from my house, through a mutual friend. And they invited me to come stay with them. And it took about 2 months for me to actually receive that, and be okay with leaving my family. And I, like, in the middle of the night, I would like pack up my stuff that I thought I would need. And then I chose this random day and I was like, okay, I'm going to tell my family that I'm leaving. And I remember writing this note, to them, because I knew it was going to be pretty traumatic. And so I wrote this note to them, and I told them, I was going to take them to dinner, but they wouldn't even get out of the car. So I had to sit in the back of their car and tell them, because they kind of knew what was going on. And, after that, I became the monster to my entire dad's family, my entire mom's side of the family, and they were the victim. They were devastated that their little girl left and hurt them as badly as I did by leaving. And I was 18 and allowed. And I had to get rid of my social media and my Facebook and my email, because I was being harassed every day by people thinking that I was this horrible, horrible person who left her family in dire need. And
That's terrible.
yeah, it was hard.
Yeah, yeah. You must have felt like you had to just completely start over and start brand new.
Yeah, well, and two, I mean, I was living with this family who didn't really know the extent of, how deep my trauma was. And so it got to the point where it was actually less painful to me to start interacting with my family again after about a month. And that was the point they kind of sat me down and they're like, Skyler, we can't take care of you, the family who I moved in with. We won't let you go back to your family because it's unsafe. You can either, um, go live on the street or you can go to rehab. And I remember crying because I had asked to go to rehab for years, just to get away and to heal, because like I said, everything was my fault. So I was taught I was this sick person. And yeah, I had used coping skills, before that were unhealthy. I did have an addiction, and I did have an eating disorder. But at that point in my life, I was 18 and most of that had subsided. But rehab really was the only choice for me. And so I ended up receiving that offer and I called a rehab facility, left that same day, didn't tell my family, and then was admitted into inpatient rehab in Arizona.
Mm. What was that like for you?
It was really intense. I went in there responding the way that I responded to everyone in my life with I'm fine. Um, I'm very intelligent. I kind of know what things are because I had studied, psychology as a child, just trying to figure out how to cope with my family and my own self. And so I was kind of like the Hermione of rehab in the beginning, and I had all the answers, and I looked really great, and you know, I I wasn't really emotional. And then it came to the point where I had to share my story. And I had used all of my, intelligence and poetic wisdom, to write this kind of false story about my home life, of just trying to make it as pretty as I could. And instead of reading it normally, I ended up having like a panic attack when I read it, and ended up like having to rewrite the story without any words and using my left hand because I'm not ambidextrous. And then all of it started to pour out. And then rehab became really hard.
Mm.
And I had a
How long were you? Oh, go ahead.
oh no, it's okay. I was in rehab for 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this was like 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
You're,
So
you're 23 now?
I'm 23 and I left my family when I was 18.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where did you go when you left rehab?
Lo and behold, I ended up coming to Oregon, and the only people that I knew in Oregon were a distant relative of my father, and I had not seen them since I was 3 years old, and it was terrifying, but I sat back and I listened to, my faith and my intuition and my spirit. And at that point, everyone knew that I was in rehab because, I was using my credit card and things like that. And so I was getting lots of letters. And her letter was the only letter from my entire family system that was about me and not blaming me. And I had applied to a school in Oregon, and I thought, okay, well, I think it might be safe enough to like stay with them for 2 months before I go to school. And I ended up staying with them a lot longer. And yeah, that was a crazy ride in and of itself.
Yeah. So did your parents try to reach out to you while you were staying with them?
Yeah. So when I moved in with my aunt and my uncle, I didn't tell them for a year and a half why I had left. I kind of just played along with that I was the sick one, and I had hurt my family or whatever really they wanted to think. And every single day my family would call and try and get my aunt to talk or get my aunt to tell them, what was going on. And I remember just constantly saying that I didn't want to talk to them. And they tried every single way, to get to me. And it was very hard.
Yeah, that must have been tough to be in that situation where you had, just left your parents and, gone to get help, and then now you're back in your family situation again.
hmm
Yeah. Now, have you had any contact with your parents since then?
No, I think I maybe talked to them on the phone once or twice when it came to documents or like taxes or something like that when I was
Hmm.
still living with my aunt and my uncle. But after I left my aunt and my uncle's house, a couple years back, I haven't had any contact with them at all.
Hmm. Yeah. So tell us about, like these past 5 years and what they looked like for you and kind of, how you were able to work through everything that you were struggling with and get to where you are today.
Yeah. Well, after a lengthy story. So, for me, it was really my pain became too big for me to even live, which is what kind of, made me come back. I did end up getting to the school that I applied for, that I intended to move to Oregon, because, and I was there for only 3 months. And then I ended up coming back. So I moved to Oregon, in 2012. And I stayed with my aunt and uncle until that fall. So I came around like in March, right before I turned 19. And I went to school, and for 3 months I was at George Fox University, and I loved it. I actually got to talk about my story there and how I was healing. And once I immediately moved to Oregon, I was going to therapy about twice a week. And lo and behold, my therapist ended up, I lived about 45 minutes from the school that I was going to attend. And she was a professor there. And so I got to stick with her the whole time that I was at school. And then up until about a year ago, I continued to work with her. And so when I was at George Fox, I ended up being Skyler fully, the Skyler that I kind of started to reclaim when I was in rehab. I didn't have to hide what I was going through. I didn't have to hide that I was going to therapy because I had an abusive childhood. And I started to really get to share about what, had happened to me. And it was really powerful and beautiful. And then I ended up, coming back to my aunt and uncle's house that December, and I got a really hard awakening when my aunt woke up really early one morning before I was going to go to therapy, and she looked at me and she just bawled and she said, "My brother hurt you, didn't he?" And I remember just crying and holding her. And that day when I went to therapy, I lost it, and I remember my therapist kind of looking at me and she said, "This is a long time coming. They should have realized a long, long time ago, that you were abused. And why are you so upset?" And I said, "Well, because now it's real, and I think really, out of everything that I have done, questioning moving in with my aunt and uncle was a big thing for me because it was very, very hard, and it put a lot of stress, all of these other things. And it was very scary for me to be in that home. And yet they loved me so well. And for them to know what had happened was just like having a real piece of blood related family know my truth. And that just made it that much harder. And so right after that, that kind of like was the camel or the straw that broke the camel's back. And so when I was 20, so I turned 20 in April of that next year after Christmas, and I couldn't go back to school, and that's when healing got really, really hard. I ended up kind of regressing back until like childhood years and walking out my trauma fully. And I like to say like it was harder for me to heal than it was to endure the trauma, because when I was enduring, I could kind of normalize a lot and numb a lot and fake a lot, and really repress and dissociate, and healing was facing everything, and really
Yeah,
going through it again.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, when you're going through it, you might be numb to it,
Yeah.
but then when you're healing, you have to face it. You have to, accept it for what it is and feel it, and really just put yourself through that. Like you can't heal by being numb,
Hmm. Yeah.
unfortunately,
Yeah,
right?
right. Exactly.
Um, but yeah, so that's an interesting point that you bring up there. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. Yeah. And, I think that's, one of the hardest things when I, now started. I think there comes a time in everyone's life where, or at least what I have noticed with a lot of my tribe and community, where your healing gets to a point where you have to start being an advocate for it as well. It's like a part of our journey of really reclaiming our voice and helping others reclaim theirs, whether it's, behind the scenes of literally just, giving money to an organization that you love, or if it's, becoming an advocate in a more prominent way. Like I started to work with nonprofits and things like that. But you know, one of the biggest fears with healing is that it will be a tsunami. That you will not be able to endure it, and I really think that healing is healing is finding boundaries within our own self and our own, way that we feel, and reclaiming that as we walk through all of the things that we had faced. I like to kind of say like reclaiming the definition of our emotions, because for me, emotions were based on my abuse. And so every time I felt anger, it was my mom's, I would fear that it was, like even if I threw out the trash wrong and my aunt or someone that I loved, would remind me like, hey, this is how we would like you to do it. I would respond as if I was going to get beaten, because I did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, I had to walk through understanding why I responded that way in order to reclaim that definition. And that's what healing is. It's just going at your own pace and really redefining, how we can live again, and making sure that we understand personally, not just that we're told that we are more than what we've experienced.
Yeah, healing is something that we can be in control of,
Hmm.
whereas, what happened to us was not something that we had control of. To continue on with your story here,
Yeah.
where did things go from here?
So yeah, we left off when I was about 20, and I was regressing back into my, childhood years. And I think that was when I intuitively, my therapist was so amazing. She was well versed in trauma. And she knew that I needed to kind of be in charge, like you said, of my own healing process in order to make it mine. And that is something that I'm so passionate about when I'm teaching, is making it yours. Because if it's just something that you're adding as like another thing to your to-do list, then you can't do it that day, and so you feel guilty, it's not really going to be integrated into your life the way that we want healing to be. And so for me, I ended up sketching out like my most abused ages for me personally. So that was like toddler, 3 years old, 5 years old, 8, 11, 16, and 18. And I drew the pictures of them with what I had in my mind, because I didn't have any pictures of them. And then I ended up writing out every single thing in detail, and not just, oh, that was painful. So like rape and incest and beatings and all of these things, from what I remembered had happened to them. And I started to really reclaim what it looked like, when I was out in public, because at that point in my life, I could have been triggered by a box of kittens as I could have been seeing my actual parents, which thankfully I never did. But I didn't really have any control with my PTSD or my depression or my anxiety. And so, kind of writing it all out and not carrying it anymore and putting it on a piece of paper, I started to also reclaim those ages, along with vocalizing and defining what they had gone through. And so I knew that if I was triggered by this noise, I started to really, understand that, oh, it's because I was abused this way. And that age, my 3 year old really loved animals. And so I would go and play with animals if I felt this intense trigger. And that's kind of how I slowly started to come out of the very deep repression that I was dealing with, and into like a wholer, more 20-year-old self. And that was really powerful. And I ended up starting to teach dance in the small town that we were living in, and kind of reclaiming some of my soul ground, as I like to say it, like my surface area. So when I was emotionally hit with something, I was able to stand on that ground and go, well, I know who I am apart from what I've experienced. And so I can start like being whole again. And that was really cool. I did end up reporting my father, and that was a whole nother, big intense situation. And nothing actually really happened with that, unfortunately. But I did do it, and I think it was just a part of what I needed to do in order to really let go.
I love how you've been able to heal just kind of little by little
Hmm.
and just take your time with it and go at your own pace, and how you've at least, you've had the awareness to go back to certain ages and make those connections and find out, where things really stem from, so that you can deal with them then, so that they're not a part of your life now. And I think that that's, something that is not easy to do. A lot of people don't think to do that,
Yeah.
We're focused on, okay, what's the issue now, and why, what is it about me right now that is causing it, rather than going back into the past and trying to find the answer for it there.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think allowed you to do that?
I think I was very blessed to be able to not really have to hold a full-time job or, take care of a family, or I really just had myself. And
You had all the time you needed to focus on it.
yeah, and I also, I think working with kids again, I slowly, every opportunity that I really did take as an intuitive lesson of going, okay, it's time for me to heal here, like you said, going at my own pace, was really an external response. So when I started to heal my inner child, I didn't really know to do that until I was working with kids and like being triggered by a little boy like sitting on my lap, and I would freak out. And I remember going home and I would cry my eyes out. And I go, that's so sad that like I'm triggered by children. Why is that? And so I would like then go back into those deep, moments of my past and really reclaim my inner child. Or when I was reclaiming like my inner rebel, I was around people who were artistic and beautiful. And that's also how I kind of reclaimed that part of my mother. And then I was around, it was really environmental. And I was just very thankful to be around people slowly over time who allowed me to really, I'm such an intuitive person already. And like, I really am introspective. And so, my mind was kind of just a safe place for me. And so whatever my environment looked like, I kind of used that as a guide to healing.
Yeah, I think it's really incredible how you've been able to take all these pieces that, of you that were probably just like scattered all over the place
Oh
and
yeah.
essentially, just try to like pick them back up and put them back together so that it all makes sense and you can see who you really are,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And it hasn't been a long time for you,
No,
I
not at
mean,
all.
yeah, and of course, not to make anyone feel bad if it's taken them a long time, but
No.
everyone will do it on their whatever timetable is right for them. But I think what's really encouraging in your story is that you have been able to do it, in a relatively short amount of time. And even in that time frame, you've been able to take your time with it. So I think it just shows us that it's possible for things to change, more quickly than you might think they will.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the way that I did it was, as wonderful as it was to heal, I guess, quote unquote, as quickly as I did. I mean, it was so intense. I had days where I would throw up from pain. I had days where I was on my knees saying I didn't know if I could continue. And yet somewhere deep within me, I knew that pushing through all of those moments and really going deep was a vital part of what I was called to do. And I always like to tell everyone like freedom doesn't have an expiration date. Healing healing kind of expands time in a weird way. Like these 5 years have felt like 20 at least. And it's really because I'm reclaiming my wholeness and not just trying to formulate a present day life that is accommodating to my needs. I'm going back into the roots, and not everyone is going to have the opportunity to do that. And so how do we kind of take what we are given and really sit with ourselves and start to integrate healing into our lives, regardless of what we have to do outside of it, whether, we're parents or we have full-time jobs or several jobs, or, healing isn't really accessible to us because we don't have the funds. Like, how do we how do we start to take care of ourselves and the small moments that we do have, and that is what I'm so passionate about because, the way that I was able to heal was very unique. And I got to really go full throttle. And it's not always something I recommend because it was very difficult. But now I'm standing here and I get to walk with people where I had to walk alone. And I'm still walking through healing myself. Like it's an ever long evolution. But every single little piece I get to do now, instead of being like, before when I was going through that deep stuff and on my knees and crying that I couldn't continue, I used to have to like put a little carrot in front of my face, like a metaphorical one, and be like, just continue. Like, hope is present, even though I didn't really know what hope was. And now I have this beautiful life that I've cultivated. And I'm like, okay, like now I don't have to try and convince myself to heal more. I'm just willing. And we get to that point slowly over time of recognizing like, we're going to have a hard time regardless. I might as well choose this healing road, even if I don't know that I'm worth it yet, because I get to a point in my life where I realize that I want to take back who I am. And it's like you said, it's, healing is what we can control, and really give homage to our inner warriors who did have to survive, regardless if that, survival looks anything like mine. Like, you are worth it. And to surround yourself with people who validate that is huge.
And I think the one thing to keep in mind there from what you just said is that, we can work on our healing no matter what our situation looks like, and how busy we may be or what have you.
Yeah.
There are things that we can do every day, even if it's something small. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because the worst thing is when people feel like, there's no hope for them to heal, and they don't think that they have the time to work on it or anything. And it's sad, when they feel that way. And so I mean, I just want them to know that, you can do it little by little, and whatever works for you, but there's always going to be some room there for you to work on that.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, and making it personal and making it yours, and integrated it into real life. One of my favorite things is being present in moments that, like, even if all we have that day is the times when we're driving in between picking up our kids from school, or we're brushing our teeth, or we're that day, like, having those moments be our moments, and it's as simple as that, and it's not really simple, but it's, being present in those times of going, my rest or my self-care doesn't need to look a certain way to be valid, just as like my healing doesn't need to look a certain way to be valid. So if my self-care and healing that day is as I'm brushing my teeth and I'm grounding my feet into the, floor, and deep breathing and saying, I am capable, or maybe just, I feel like shit right now, and whether or not you
Hmm.
want to use an expletive or not, or, I feel bad, or,
That's fine.
all of these things, and just validating our emotions where we don't get to in real life, I guess, situations that we have to kind of just, push through. And so, like, having little moments to ourselves where we're taking back who we are, and validating our voices, even if nothing else in our external world can validate our voice, we can validate our voice, and we can be the pursuer of our hearts. And regardless if, you think it's impossible, like, it's just finding what is possible for you in that moment. We're not going to all be able to heal instantaneously. Healing isn't a destination oriented deal. It's a lifelong thing that we get to practice, so that we can love ourselves and be who we are, and know our worth, and that's going to be as unique as you are and your experiences. And so I just think it really is something I'm so passionate about, just, sharing and advocating for.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great. So I know, one of the things that you talk about a lot is freedom, and we mentioned that in the beginning. I'd love to know, like, what does freedom mean to you?
Mm. Freedom is a feeling. And freedom for me personally is sitting down and just in this moment, like, taking a deep breath and being able to feel what I'm actually feeling in this present moment. Like, I'm a little nervous sharing my story right now, and using and talking about the people that have walked with me through it, and yet I also feel this immense peace that it's time, and I'm trusting my heart, and I have choice to validate my voice, and I know my truth is my truth because I feel it. And I think freedom is a feeling, because feelings you can take everywhere. And so for me, it's like, this whole time my healing has been led by that innate feeling of freedom, of love in every cell of my body, of being valid, of feeling worthy, of knowing who I am. And anytime over the years that I would come across a healing method or modality, or people who couldn't receive my truth, or experiences that were dangerous to me, that feeling of freedom was how I discerned things. You know, it was like, does this make me feel free? Does it make me feel like this feeling of love and lightness and incapableness and worthiness? Or does it make me toss that aside or push that into a little box like it had to be when I was a child? And so freedom for me now is like creating a life that feels like that everywhere. You know, even when things are hard, I get to sit back, put my feet on the ground, take a deep breath, connect to my body. How is it feeling? Because my body is my biggest responder, my first responder to my emotions, and recognizing that, oh, like I'm okay in this moment. I'm okay, and I have choice, and that's freedom to me.
Yeah, I love how you see it as a feeling,
Yeah.
and that it's something that you can take with you wherever you are.
Yeah.
So, Skylar, how are you doing today?
Right now, I'll be completely honest, it's a little nerve-wracking. I'm very I'm an open book, when I share my story and all of these things, but it's very new for me to talk about more than just my experience of my story and, share that I did move in with my aunt and uncle or I did, go to this university and I have experienced these things and um it's still a little like, oh, I don't know how that feels yet, and yet I know that I'm ready. So yeah, I think I'm a little nervous and I'm hopeful and I'm excited to be talking to you, and I'm excited to share this message because it's my whole world and my life. To advocate for freedom being a feeling, that's something we don't have to, be, in a certain level of worth or wealth to receive. And yeah, that's kind of how I'm feeling.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it can definitely be scary. I know that, the work that you're doing and your message is going to help so many people.
Thank
Um,
you.
and speaking of that, tell us a little more about what you have going on today. And I know you have a book in the works, so tell us about that as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of came into the world of being my own boss not too long ago. I used to work behind the scenes in the performing arts, which is kind of like my sanctuary space, and helping all these people with, making businesses and dreams their reality. And then I kind of was like, oh, well, if I do it for everyone else, I could do it for me. And so I started out as a mentor, but then I kind of realized that my mentoring is so much more of a ministry because I've been doing it my whole life. I don't think I've ever met someone who I didn't mentor, especially as I started walking out my own journey. And then I realized these people, this community, this tribe that I was cultivating needed access to that freedom feeling and that healing that maybe they wouldn't otherwise have access to. And so I just launched our pre-sale of my first set of mini video courses. So they're like 5-day mini e-courses. And this one is with my tribe's help. One of them is called Growing Freedom, which is all about like active surrender and realizing like how you can truly start reclaiming some space in your heart, and not in a sense of this is a block that I need to erase from my life, or this is something that makes me feel unworthy or dirty. It's something that I can feel and then release and reclaim love in that area without erasing, my experience. And then the next one is reclaiming how to feel. And so kind of what we talked about with me and reclaiming anger and fear and all of these things, it's all about taking, those emotions, whether or not we swing on a scale pendulum of, numb to very, very reaction oriented, and kind of reclaiming how we personally find balance. And then another one is all about triggers. So how to honor the triggers that we experience and that we're not less because we may be triggered, regardless of what we've gone through. And even if it's something that you don't necessarily denote as trauma. We all have something that comes up in our lives that makes us feel a little weird, and how do we handle that? And then the fourth course is all about like making healing real, and so it's all about taking those things that we're learning in our healing journey and making sure that we know how to communicate with our partners, or just our friends or our family. And because our roles shift in life as we start to reclaim more of ourselves and our ground and our healing work. And how do we start to honor that growth in our own environments, and not just in our own hearts. And so yeah, I'm going to be launching a new set in about 2 months, and it's kind of just going to go from there. I also do YouTube videos where I share my story and talk about the book that I'm currently still writing. And yeah, and then I have my online community that we kind of just all hang out on my page, and when I post silly things or deep things or wise things, we can kind of all just share. And I'm a big, big fan of supporting my people and sharing what they're doing in the world, and kind of community oriented, stepping forward into our truth and leadership. So
Awesome. And where can people find out about your courses?
They're all on my website. So Skyler-Mechelle.com, and it's Michelle. So it's Mechelle.
Well, I'll have it linked up on your show notes page,
Yeah.
so it'll be easy for people. Great. So, I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today, and that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it would be that it's okay to choose you, because I didn't know that, and I'm still learning that. And to look at my little girl, which I have many times when she rises up within me and gets very, very scared, I get to step back, kind of like what we talked about, even if I don't have time, and put my feet on the ground and look at that little girl and tell her that she can choose her, instead of the world. And she can choose her instead of protecting other people. And she can choose her, even when it's scary, and even when it's uncomfortable, and even when it hurts. And she can choose her because she's enough.
I love that. We're all enough
Yeah.
as we are, and we can all choose ourselves.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, and like I just said, I'll have your website on the show notes page. What are some other good ways for people to connect with you?
I have social media, so I post on Instagram, and they have like Instagram stories now. So mostly just they're like videos of me walking and like Googling over nature. But there's also photos of me there. And then my Facebook, as I said, is kind of like my community. I actually don't have a Facebook group. I've thought long and hard, and I'm an overgiver in general. And so I've created intentionally a very, very safe environment on Facebook, and my community loves beautifully and with boundaries, and they're all wonderful. And so yeah, Instagram, Facebook. I just got a Twitter, still figuring out how to use it, and then my website. So yeah, those are kind of like my little ways that you can connect with me, and then my YouTube channel, of course.
Great. Yeah, I'll have all that linked up. So, Skyler, I just want to thank you for coming on here today, and, for reaching out to me and connecting with me, and for sharing your story, and, really just being vulnerable with us and letting us know about what you've been through and how you've been able to get to where you are today. And I think, it's an inspiring story, and hopefully, one that is going to resonate with the listeners, and they're going to be able to take something away from it for themselves. And like I said, I think, the work you're doing and you just spreading your message is going to help so many people. So thank you for coming on here to do that.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to walk alongside everyone who's advocating for freedom in their own way, and to be a part of your story as well.
All right. Well, I hope that you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 90. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Skyler M to find the links mentioned during this episode, or to leave a comment. So I hope you've been inspired and encouraged by Skyler's story. I think that it's such an incredible one, and I'm really glad that I was able to have her on here to share it with you today. And I definitely want to invite you to go check out her YouTube videos. They're just so raw and vulnerable and just awesome. And so definitely go check those out. And of course, they'll be linked up over on the show notes page. And be sure to come back next week, as I'm going to be joined by Singularity storyteller Isabel Rizzo. And Isabel actually knows a few of my past podcast guests, including Skyler. So it was really cool to connect with her and to have her on the show and to share her story. And she's going to be talking about finding your identity and consciously creating your story. So definitely come back to check that one out. And as a reminder, if you're interested in that deal from Audible, you can find that at thegrassgetsgreener.com/Audible, where you can get the free audiobook download along with a 30-day free trial. And also, don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And as always, have hope.